If one day you and your own brother were forced to choose who would live and who would die, would you strike him down? Don't answer too quickly. In this story, there are no true villains, and no one can escape the grasp of fate. One brother chose to believe in the gods, while the other believed only in himself. One sought to build order, while the other wanted to shatter every rule. Yet, no one could have foreseen that the Roman Empire, a power destined to rule the world for a millennium, would not be born from glory, but from the blood of two brothers. The most cruel part? By the time the film ends, you don't even know whose side you should be on. It is the 8th century BC. The Italian peninsula is still a savage wilderness. There is no Rome, no empire, no law, only countless tribes locked in perpetual warfare. In such a time, the weak were either reduced to slavery or became food for wild beasts. Human life was cheaper than the dirt beneath their feet. The film, The First King, recounts the most brutal chapter of the Roman foundation myth, the story of the brothers Romulus and Remus. The film opens by thrusting the audience into a flood from which there is almost no escape. The surging water acts like a maddened beast, swallowing forests, sweeping away livestock, and washing away everything the brothers once held dear. Remus and Romulus fought desperately to stay afloat, yet the relentless flood swept them away from each other. The younger brother, Romulus, screams for his sibling, while his older brother desperately hunts for him amidst the rapids. There are no heroes here, and no divine intervention. They have only each other, clawing their way back from the brink of death time and time again. But when they finally crawl to safety, they realize their true nightmare is only just beginning. Waiting for them is not salvation, but the iron cavalry of the Albans. As the most powerful tribe in the region, the Albans do not view these refugees as human. To them, the displaced are nothing more than prey, hunted, pursued, and slaughtered at the slightest sign of resistance. The brothers survived the flood, but they lost their flock, which means they lost their only wealth. In that era, having no livestock meant having no identity. Having no land meant being perpetually vulnerable to those who saw you as nothing more than prey. This statement would go on to become the most significant piece of foreshadowing in the entire film. The captives rely on rainwater to sustain their strength. At daybreak, chained together like livestock, they are marched toward their fate. Along the way, they see countless others like themselves, people who once had homes, people who were once free, now reduced to nothing more than property of the Albans. Soon, they are brought to an open field in the tribal camp. The priestess, Satne, lights the sacred fire and begins the ritual. The slaves kneel before her. The Albans force two captives to fight to the death. The one who falls is tossed straight into the flames. Next, they selected Romulus to enter the arena. Seeing this, Remus stepped forward and volunteered to be his opponent. During the duel, flashes of the past flood Remus's mind. As the priestess approaches, Romulus snaps into action. Their movements are fast, brutal, and raw with primal violence. Seeing the opportunity, the other captives break their bonds and launch an attack on the guards. However, in the midst of the chaos, Romulus was run through by a guard's weapon. Remus rushes to his brother's side while the guard flees. This battle for survival marks the turning point in the brothers' relationship. They forcibly abduct the priestess, Satne, along with the eternal flame she guards. Faced with a raging river, the group falls into despair. They have reached the Velience's territory, a forbidden land cursed by the gods. They say the forest is haunted by evil spirits and that no one escapes it alive. But with the Alban cavalry closing in from behind and nothing but certain death ahead, there is no other way out. The group cut a ragged and unsettling figure as they trudged through the muddy marshes and dense thickets. To make matters worse, Romulus was severely wounded, barely clinging to consciousness. Some argued that Remus should leave him behind, while others insisted that as long as Romulus was alive, they could not abandon him. In the end, Remus hoisted his brother onto his back and pressed on. When night fell, hunger began to devour everyone's sanity.
Non animal vortitek van sei che morto che los. Cambren Maximus, sai che salvi esos.
Sono manese divino. Io sei zit, e buone dizer. Molti senti.
Sei che manebimus. Doveste nos rabionti. Capita venuco son nos molto pericordia facienti. Accide marche!
Yet, no one dared to move in the darkness. They knew the forest was even more treacherous at night. Eventually, a man named Mars slipped away on his own. When dawn broke, the group resumed their journey, only to stumble upon a horrific sight: the mangled remains of Mars, his body torn in half and hanging from a tree. Someone in the group claimed that Romulus had touched the sacred fire of Vesta, calling it an act of sacrilege and the root of all their calamities. The natural environment grew increasingly hostile, with cold and hunger torturing everyone. Remus drifted into a nightmare, seeing his brother standing before him, only for his body to be suddenly engulfed in flames. He jolted awake to find Romulus being pinned to the ground by one of the men. The commotion stirred the others. A terrifying idea began to spread through the crowd. They decided they must kill Romulus. If they sacrificed the man who had angered the gods, the rest might survive. More and more of them raised their weapons, their eyes fixed on the unconscious Romulus. Remus stepped forward, and a brutal duel ensued. The man fell, dead, at Remus's hands. Remus stood alone, staring down the others, and not a single person dared to take another step. They knew then that this young man was far more dangerous than any beast in the forest. However, brute force could not quell their hunger. The group had been without food for days. If things continued this way, They would starve to death long before the god's wrath could claim them. Remus remained by his brother's side, immovable. To ensure their survival, he decided to venture deep into the forest to hunt. Before leaving, he approached the priestess, Satni. He promised to protect her, but only if she swore to protect Romulus while he was away. Once Remus was gone, another man in the group began inciting the others to finish Romulus. They crept slowly towards Satni and the wounded man. The man told Satni that if she stepped aside, she would be spared. But Satni did not move. She slowly raised her hands and began to chant. The man fell to the ground, gasping for air as he stared up at her in sheer terror. Meanwhile, deep in the woods, Remus had found his prey. Before daybreak, a figure emerged, drenched in blood. It was Remus. He dragged a massive stag toward the group. No one knew what he had endured to claim it. They only saw that the beast's heart was still faintly beating. Remus dropped the stag before them and said only one word: "Eat." In that moment, the look in everyone's eyes changed. For the first time, they realized that these two brothers could not only survive, they could lead them to survival as well. Remus fed the stag's heart to his brother, telling Romulus, "This was the greatest stag in the forest. It knelt before me before it died."
Prostravit, corat memet, cum mortum spurisit. Cordeius illutu curres, irrupibus ad repes. Tiber in me cum transis, acros tectum condemus. Notenque, suffisere tibeamus. Preter meus, vidagus evis.
Romulus and Remus.
Sensing the mist rising, Remus decided it was time to move. At this moment, he was no longer just a fugitive. He began to lead them like a true chieftain.
Emetat spicite. Egnis preter meum tuitus. Preter meum vivit. Egum fusia tiberes supestes esum. Egum albana mort vos salvos vivici. Egum famem vobis explevi. Vos non sacrati estis. Non soli estis.
He told them they were not beasts. They would have their own land. They would have a home of their own. If anyone wanted to leave, they could leave right then. No one moved. They had finally seen hope. During a torrential downpour, they laid an ambush in the woods, clashing with a hunting party from a nearby tribe. As the last warrior fell, twitching in the mud, the rain showed no sign of stopping. Remus stood in the downpour, soaked in blood and muck, gasping for air, a look of maddened satisfaction burning in his eyes. They reached the tribe's settlement to find only the elderly, women, and young children. It was clear that all of the tribe's warriors had been slaughtered by Remus and his men. He walked up to an elder and declared himself the new leader of the tribe. In that era, fire represented not just light, but the will of the gods. Whoever held the sacred fire held the protection of the divine, and it was because of this that a prophecy, one that would seal the brothers' fate, soon descended upon them. The tribe's people held a ritual for their fallen warriors and chose Satni to deliver the prophecy.
Tu uti oinum ionti, ti folium scaversum, retres, apud utrisque regem, is novum imperium condat, et orbis nunquam novit, nec venientibus annis noscet, uti oinum ionti, ti
As everyone held their breath, she spoke words that made Remus's expression darken with every syllable. Everyone was stunned into silence, but the truly suffocating part was yet to come. Satnai continued, revealing that the man who would one day build a great kingdom would be worshipped as a god by future generations. But before that could happen, he would have to kill his own brother with his own hands, for only the blood of a brother could serve as the foundation of the new kingdom. The air froze.
In altera leus micet, altera in tenebra eterna.
Pater meu, consolatus mesti.
Tuus praetis manebit, praetrem necabit, tantum crucem regem nascet.
Remus approached his brother, though Romulus remained unfazed. He did not believe the prophecy, convinced it was merely Satnai's way of seeking revenge for her abduction. To the very end, Remus refused to kill his brother.
Lineam, noli divum tangese.
Fides ius sapis ex.
Instead, he dragged Satnai into the forest. His heart was heavy with turmoil. He tied her to a tree and told her that if her god truly loved her, he would save her from the starving beasts. Satnai watched him silently and whispered that true punishment never comes immediately. The gods do not act out of anger. They simply allow fate to slowly wind its way toward its predestined end. Remus refused to listen. In his eyes, the woman was still trying to manipulate them. He did not believe in fate, and he certainly did not believe in gods. When Remus returned, he dispersed those gathered around the bodies of the dead, declaring it a punishment for those who disobeyed his orders. Just then, Romulus approached. Seeing his brother standing there, Remus was overjoyed. However, Romulus immediately asked about the priestess. From that moment on, though the brothers still stood together, they were walking down two vastly different paths. Remus grabbed a torch and set fire to the surrounding huts. He looked at those who knelt before the sacred fire with nothing but disdain. Many began to waver, questioning for the first time if the gods truly existed. To him, oracles were merely tools used by the powerful to control the weak. It is never the gods who truly determine our fate, but those who hold the weapons. When Remus returned to the spot where he had left Satnai, he found her body torn to pieces by wild animals. In that moment, Remus knew that he and his brother could no longer walk the same path. Remus did not kill for the sake of killing. He wanted to destroy the god that lived in the hearts of men. At daybreak, Romulus stepped outside. He found the sacred fire, which had been overturned, long extinguished. As he rekindled the flame, those around him watched in silence. With the tribe's warriors dead, they had no choice but to flee. Romulus handed the fire to a young girl, who would become the tribe's new priestess. Meanwhile, Remus and his followers pushed forward. What they didn't know was that the Albans were closing in. Romulus, leading the migration, spotted the Alban cavalry and realized they were hunting the escaped slaves. The others pleaded with Romulus not to break away from the tribe, for they knew full well how powerful the Albans were.
Albam ne montenese potiesti, stremioires sonti.
Nomquam acite, vot alba, fortis, timendachbe, nemo laudaresit, nemo. Ollum inimicos nostri, nobis puercoli, vobiscum buenas ors.
Remus and his companions reached the river. He heard faint sounds that no one else could detect. The Albans struck, slaughtering Remus's followers. While the others scrambled toward the water, Remus charged ahead without fear. His men fell, one by one. Suddenly, Romulus appeared with the rest of the tribe. Facing a common enemy, Remus stepped back to the front. He surged into the enemy ranks like a wolf. The brothers fought side by side once again. No arguments, no resentment. Their coordination remained flawless. For a moment, you might have believed there was still a chance to turn back. After the battle, they gathered the dead, but Remus sat alone to the side. In the end, everyone drifted away from him. He walked toward Romulus, yet the invisible boundary between them stopped him in his tracks. In his mind, as long as someone dared to draw a line, someone else would inevitably dare to cross it. True power needed no gods and no rules. They raised their weapons and began to walk toward each other. Since birth, they had never truly been apart. They had herded sheep together, fled for their lives together, endured starvation together, and survived the flood together. They shared the same dream and the same future. But now, that invisible line had forged them into two entirely different men. As the sword thrust forward, there was no swelling music, no heroic roar, only the heavy, devastating strike between brothers. Remus slowly collapsed, blood soaked into the earth, drop by drop. The prophecy was finally fulfilled. Romulus gripped him tight. In this moment, he was not a king. He was simply a man who had lost his only kin. Remus felt no resentment. With his final breath, he whispered to Romulus, "Take me with you." He told him, "Bury me on the other side of the river." He said, "There, you will build a city that is truly safe." From that moment on, Romulus had to carry the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders and continue the journey. He stood before all the survivors, gazing down at the earth, now stained crimson with his brother's blood, and spoke the final, most haunting words of the film.
Odinam crossis et Islam kvit malefacit. Quam petra ptura messet. Acoinum verbum sculptum messet. Quid animo opera hominum civitatem transitosasum, adoritosasum ad perfugam petitosasum resolebim. Vertimesci. Isdam Roma.
The film does not portray Romulus as a hero, nor does it cast Remus as a villain. One represents order, the other represents freedom. One reveres the gods, the other believes only in man. One chooses to establish rules, the other chooses to shatter them. Neither man was wrong. It is simply that the birth of a civilization requires someone to draw the first boundary, and it inevitably requires someone to pay the price for that line. Therefore, The First King is not truly a story about fratricide. It is a story about the first collision between faith, power, freedom, and law at the dawn of a civilization. Rome was not built upon glory. It was built upon an irreparable sacrifice. And that is precisely why, when Romulus declares, "Tremble, this is Rome," we see not only the beginning of a nation, but the dawn of an entire era.